We're now going to demonstrate skin closure techniques. So we'll demonstrate the simple interrupted and the cruciate suture pattern. These suture patterns on the skin should be applied relatively loose in small animals to allow for tissue swelling. Obviously, in a normal patient, we would have closed the subcutaneous tissues prior to closing the skin. For skin closure, what we'll do is we'll try and prevent handling the skin with our thumb forceps. We'll palm our thumb forceps so we can use them to handle our needle coming out of the tissues, but otherwise we'll use our hands. So what I tend to do is pull the tissues apart a little bit so that I can tense the tissues, and it helps you go through the tissues with your needle. And then you can either go both sides together, hopefully your skin is well opposed after your subcutaneous closure, or you could come out in the middle and do it in 2 bites. Then you unpalm your thumb forceps to handle your needle, and now you can pass it through. For the simple interrupted suture pattern, you take 1 bite on each side of your incision, equidistant from the edge of your incision, and we'll then just place our suture. These sutures on the skin of small animals should be relatively loose. So what we do is we apply our first and our second throw, and then on our third throw is when we'll tighten this suture. And if your throws are square, you will not just slip down on your tissues. And then we can add our 2 extra throws. We would do this obviously with a non-absorbable suture. So obviously in this case our subcutaneous tissues have not been closed for the demonstration, so these sutures look extremely loose and they're exposing subcutaneous tissues. This happens also when you have very thick subcutaneous tissues if your subcutaneous closure is not quite opposed. In this case, the cruciate pattern can be helpful. So for the cruciate pattern, what we'll do is we'll go across our incision as we did for the simple interrupted pattern, and then we'll pick up our needle, and we'll go across again and do the same thing once more. And we want the distance sort of between the skin edge, cut edge, and your suture to be equal, sort of forming a little bit of a square if you look at our four bites. And then we can tie this like we did our simple interrupted suture, and we'll do this nice and loose. So again, the first throw is quite loose. We come and apply our second throw, which we don't tighten all the way, and then at our third throw we can now tighten all the way without this slipping down. And you can see I still put the suture quite loose. It's actually even looser than the first suture I applied here. This one is even looser, really, but it somehow opposes that skin a little bit better because you have 4 points of anchoring. So we'll do a few more cruciates and then a few more simple interrupted sutures for the demonstration. So again, cruciate, we come across one side, we then come across again, repeat the same maneuver, and then we tie our suture, long end, short end, nice and loose. And at our third throw, we go ahead and tighten those throws together and then add 2 more throws. Again, you can see how even without, in this demonstration on the daisy, without closing the subcutaneous tissues, we actually can oppose the skin quite nicely. And our sutures are quite loose. I can put a full needle holder underneath them. Do 1 more cruciate. You probably have gathered, I like the cruciate closure for the skin. Allows you to leave these sutures nice and loose while still opposing the skin edges. And you've probably also noticed that my suture ends, my cut ends, are quite long on the skin. So you have to remember we're going to want to remove these sutures in 10 days or 14 days. So it's much easier to catch them and to find them in the growing hair if the ends are long. So now we'll do a few more simple interrupted suture patterns. So through the tissues on either side of the incision, and we then tie these individually. Nice and loose. This is a skin closure. And then 1 last simple interrupted suture here. And our skin closure is done. People will argue as to whether or not the knot should be off of the incision when you're done closing. These knots will roll around, and so there's no real point in placing them in any specific location.